welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Nancy Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Welcome to another episode of Say It Online, our podcast where we help you understand how to communicate better on and offline to anyone that you might be speaking to. I am super excited to have Dr. Steve Young on our episode today. I saw Dr. Young speak at U Summit 2018 in Denver a few months ago. I had the pleasure of seeing him talk in a panda suit, no less. And I was just really moved by some of the things he had to share, both about health and I was intrigued by the way he communicates about health. So welcome, Steve. Pleasure to have you.
Yeah, super excited to kind of chat with your tribe.
Excellent. Well, I know that both health and movement and communication are all things that I hear about from digital agency owners all the time. But before we get too deep into that particular topic, why don't you share a little bit about your past and how you came, a little bit about what you do, how you came to be in this field, that kind of a thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think like most people, you sort of overcome your own obstacles, and from there you get to where you are in life. And so no different for me when I was young. I was a pretty sickly child, and probably because my teenage years consisted of like eating Oreo cookies and playing video games all day. So you can imagine not the most healthy person given those sort of lifestyle choices. And so I guess, yeah, over the years, just kind of realizing that behavior, those choices were not serving of my life. And so sort of late teens where I kind of realized, probably start, making changes to some of these things. And so I started to read, it started with magazines and eventually books, and that transitioned to medical journals, realizing that is really the best source of clear, unbiased, and really less biased information. And so flash forward 26 years later, tens of probably hundreds of thousands of research articles, degrees in kinesiology, physical therapy. I used to teach physiology, which is sort of the chemistry of how the body works, to med students. So yeah, just kind of using all that knowledge at first for selfish reasons, right? Just to improve my own health. And over time, of course, like any decent human being, you kind of realize, wow, this is really helpful for others. And so now the passion is just, giving people this information and helping them not only revamp their health, but really the bigger goal is to fix healthcare in the US and help worldwide over 1 billion people.
Wow, that's really amazing. I know that that is a pretty big goal. I know hearing about your own personal journey really resonates for me. I went through something very similar, realizing that my habits weren't serving me and something really happened to change. So I'd love to touch a little bit more on that big goal. But before we get there, I'm just curious. So when you decided to make that change and started to read and educate yourself, that can be kind of an overwhelming prospect. So what was the first area of kind of your health or your habits or your life that you decided to make a change in?
Sure. Yeah, so basically nutrition for sure, because I started to realize that eating packaged foods as my main source of nutrition was just unhealthy, right? And so I'm horrible concentration abilities when I was in high school. I didn't used to skip breakfast. Literally there were times where, this is pre like energy drinks, like pre Monster and Red Bull. Like I usually in the morning would run out of the house because I was so tired. I would try to maximize my sleep so I would wake up as late as possible. And literally there were times where I took a scoop of like instant coffee threw it in my mouth and ran out the door, right? So that was like really poor nutrition. And so for sure, realizing that that was extremely unhealthy, I started to basically cook my own food. I used to bring my own lunches to high school. I kind of realized that school lunch was like poison. And just by revamping my nutrition, basically, it's not rocket science, like eating organic fruits and vegetables, made a profound impact in my ability to focus and concentrate and thus learn. And so started to build all this momentum, right? Like, wow, I was like, I could actually improve my intelligence and my ability to soak in information just by, maximizing my nutrition. So I was able to absorb more information and remember more things. And so that just built such a momentum towards learning more and more about the health and the body and how all this works.
Wow. Yeah. And that, so what I'm hearing from you is I'm hearing that, as you started to educate yourself, as you started to change your habits, it actually became easier and easier because the more you changed, the more capacity you had to change is kind of what I'm hearing. The more capacity you had to learn, grow, eat new things. So was it just a smooth journey, read some stuff, decide to make a change, go for that? Or were there some kind of challenges you faced on the way? I know this is something a lot of people would agree is easier said than done. So what are some of the barriers you came up against?
Yeah, for sure. You can imagine it's obviously a lot easier to just go buy your lunch at school versus like cooking it the day before and then bringing a container with you. And, I think the only kid that brought, my own food to the cafeteria lunch. So there's these psychological, like, what will people think of me? And of course, there were plenty of, we'll call it non-favorable comments, right? Like, you're the weird kid that brings your own food. So not only were there sort of psychological barriers, but there were, we'll call it time and attention barriers of all that extra effort of preparing the food and all that. And so, yeah, so in the beginning, like anything that you start, it's tough, right? So, however, the motivation or the reason, like my big why was so big, I was just so sick of feeling sick that was enough for me to take action on it. And the beauty is, after a couple months, it just became the norm. Right. And so after a couple of months, I didn't care what people said, at lunch in the cafeteria, that I would open my Tupperware and eat my food. And the time just became the norm, like the extra 20, 30 minutes that I spent on a regular basis to prepare the food for the next day just became part of my new routine. And so at first was this, major time and sort of psychological barrier basically just went away. Like anything that we apply consistent effort towards, our brains just accept that new thing as the new norm.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that there were definitely some barriers that you came up against, both in terms of perception. What do people think about me? How do I rearrange my habits and my schedule to accommodate these new choices? But I know, speaking from my own experience, I too got really, really ill in my early 20s. And, nutrition was so powerful as a force to change it that it inspired me. But being surrounded by people who are living in different ways or have different values over and over again, I found that over the years, I've still kind of found myself slipping back into that inner conversation of, oh, well, this time I'm just going to, buy lunch at school, or this time I'm just going to get that takeout. Is that something, now that we've kind of fast forwarded 20, 26 years and you work with a lot of people, helping them through similar barriers and similar kind of health challenges, is this something that comes up? Are people, are they slipping back over time? How do you defeat that little voice inside that's telling you to do differently?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's so common. And to answer your question, yes, this does exist in majority of people. And so at the fundamental of it, we want to look at what is a symptom and what is a root cause, right? Because the same action or the same inner dialogue between person A and person B, for person A could actually just be a symptom of something deeper. For person B, it could actually be the root cause. And so I'll give you different scenarios, right? So for symptom A, let's say we'll go with, or person A, we'll go with it's a symptom thing. A lot of times it is just, they want to enjoy themselves. And for them, since they've started eating healthy, is this constant we'll call it work or constant application of effort, right? And for that person, I think eating healthy and reverting back to eating, we'll quote, unhealthy, could simply just be a matter of, all right, let's say applying extra effort for that person, because that's the path, or that's the tool that they've used to accomplish this. Now, what I've learned over the years, it's not up to us, like the outside person, to judge that as being right or wrong. That just happens to be the tool and the path that they choose, right? And so for that person, what we typically recommend is allowing them the space to have those meals that are unhealthy, right? So we typically, like I actually mentioned on stage, the 80-20 rule, where if 80% of the time you're eating healthy, then the 20% of the time that you're eating unhealthy, it really doesn't matter, right? And so that gives them the space and permission, right, to eat the cheesecake or cheesesteak and not freak out about it, because it's okay. Like, you don't have to eat 100% healthy to be healthy. Yet for person B, let's say if it's a root cause, that's where we kind of want to look at, like, what are some deeper things that's going on, and that may be relating to what's the deeper reason for, like, the relationship with food. We might need to go a little bit deeper in terms of, like, are they feeling some type of discomfort, and that discomfort is then triggering them to eat some kind of comfort food. And so that might have a very different recommendation that's not simply going to be 80-20%. It might be a little bit deeper digging into what's happening with that person. Like, where did that relationship with food come from? I'll give an example. We had a patient once where, he said he's lost over 1,000 pounds in his lifetime, meaning 100 pounds lost and 100 pounds gained, more than 10 times.
Wow.
And so through a little bit discussion, we found out that he's like addicted to sugar, which is the quote. And technically, I don't believe in addiction to sugar, but he liked his sweets, we'll say. And through deeper digging, we found out that his fondest memories of his mom and him spending quality time together where he felt loved was when they ate dessert together. And so sweet foods equals like love from his mom, right? So for that person, 80-20 doesn't work well. We need to examine a deeper connection of what food really means, because in his brain, he conceptualized it as love from his mom. And that's a very powerful and deep need. And he just attached that to desserts. And so we had to work through the sort of detaching desserts to equal love from mother.
Okay. And this is really interesting, because what I'm hearing, which is something I'm aware of, but I'm not sure that all of our listeners are, is that your habits have a deeper connection, especially your habits around food, actually have a deeper connection to past experiences and things that have happened to you. And what I'm hearing is that one of the important aspects of creating lasting change is really about identifying, what is that root cause for you, which can be totally different from person to person, and understanding that and kind of unpacking that and creating a plan that takes that into consideration. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. I mean, that's so applicable, not only for health, but that goes for, as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
So many of our even subconscious and our tendencies towards certain decisions in business and health, and really all areas of life, for sure come from much deeper, we'll call it embedded subconscious relationships, stories, operating systems, beliefs. There's many names for it. But yeah, for sure, they kind of govern most of our decisions and patterns. And so that sort of the secret sauce in terms of breaking patterns, anything that you feel like is not serving you in your life, either financially, health, relationships, lies in some of those deeper things.
I'm actually scribbling some notes down. I think this is really, really valuable. Now, something that, so I'm hearing that one of the most important approaches is really digging down to those root causes. Any kind of habit perhaps that is not serving you, that's a really effective way of going about it. Now, I'm curious when you are talking to somebody who is coming to you for help, there are so many, we've touched on diet and nutrition here a little bit, but there's so many different things that are affecting us in our life today. I know some of the things that you mentioned while you're on stage at U Summit included stress. That's a big one for me. Sleep, your gut bacteria on top of food. You mentioned even, the guilt and how you feel around the different things different habits you might have, different things you might be consuming can be very toxic, as well as also toxins that are coming in from the outside. So I'm curious, when you're talking to somebody, that's a lot and a lot for someone to kind of absorb. So how do you start that conversation and start to bridge the gap, first of all, for finding out which of those factors might be affecting them, but more importantly, for getting to that deeper conversation around what, kind of inner dialogue or past experiences are creating some of these unhealthy habits?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, you took great notes. Those were the 5 things. So awesome. I can answer that. So there's 2 scenarios, right? So I feel like there's a big difference if you were doing this one-on-one with an individual versus either, when I'm on stage or if I'm talking to a group of people, there's going to be, of course, a different approach, right? So if it's one-on-one, we have the capacity, right, in a space to observe that person. So as a keen observer of humans, and I feel like that's such a great practice for all of us, there's so many nonverbal cues coming from that person that's telling us so much about them. Their eye movements, and there's actual science behind how their brain is functioning just based on their eye movements. In fact, I don't know if you read, there's now AI software that can judge people's personalities just based on eye movements, right? And so we have all this data about their nonverbal cues that gives us hints as to what's happening innately and also what's happening as we're talking to them. And so if I start giving the general framework, for example, like the 5 things that you mentioned, like food, toxins, sleep, stress, and gut health. So you'll start to see in their face, like, what are they open to talking about and what are they not open to talk about, right? For example, if I talk about stress, and you can kind of see them like scratch their face or they have some kind of reaction. And if I talk deeper about it and they kind of, we'll call it bypass the discussion, it just tells me that they're just not open to that, right? And so they're actually so stressed that their brain cannot even take on a new thing. And so if I get that sense, then I was like, all right, let's talk about some easy things. Probably of all the 5, the easiest is going to be just go and buy non-toxic products, right? That's a few clicks on Amazon Prime, right? And so basically on a one-to-one process, just, deeply observing the human and how they're physically reacting to what you're saying will let you know where can you kind of go in. And through some type of practice, and this, again, no different than if you were to recommend some type of marketing plan, whether it be digital, print, whatever, as you're talking to the person, if you're in front of them, you can, through observing, you can see what are they open to and what are they not open to. And that already gives you some information. Whereas if it's in a crowd or a group of people, right, because you don't have that one-on-one capabilities, typically in a crowd, I will start with the 2 simplest things. I don't really go into stress, even though stress can be, for most people, the biggest thing, because it's such a big thing to tackle and more complex. I usually just start with the simplest things, right? Because a lot of times getting that quick early win builds the momentum for them to actually get more buy-in and then apply more and more effort towards it. And so in this sort of framework, that goes back to the toxins and then like the gut. They're just 2 really simple things, a few clicks, take a few supplements, and you're literally going to start to feel tremendously better, get that quick win, build the momentum, and then they have enough buy-in to now go tackle some of the deeper things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I'm hearing here is, and I think that's, as Brent, one of my mentors, would say, a gold nugget is getting a quick early win in is, I know I tend to be tempted to jump in and tackle something huge, but I know for finances as well, it can be a little bit scary to tackle something that is so big that you're not sure where to start and not sure how to get anywhere with it, versus something that is relatively small and simple, like buying different products. You're still buying products, but you can make that shift a little bit easier. And you said in terms of gut bacteria, there's a few things you could take, a few supplements, for example, that would help you and give you that win that you need to get going. So that is really awesome and cool to hear. Now, I'm curious to look at this on kind of a larger scale. One of the things you mentioned at the beginning that really stuck with me is that, you want to be changing the industry as a whole, and you want to change kind of people's health. You want to change people's health on a bigger scale. So far you've talked, one-on-one. Obviously, it sounds like you get that feedback. I know what you were saying was resonating very strongly for me in terms of when I'm talking to somebody, no matter what it's about, I think that we're kind of organically taking those cues and responding to them. In a crowd, you start with simple things. Now, how did these two concepts translate to taking on a massive, deeply entrenched industry that is decades old?
Yep. Great question, right? So whole different framework, right? So in a one-on-one, you have the capabilities to super customize, we'll call it the information. And then in a one-to-many platform, meaning, a room of people, it doesn't matter if it's, 10 or 1,000, now you're really just picking the early wins and giving them simple actionables. But now when you're going like 1 to millions, this is going to be a little bit more complex, right? So now really the solution there is platform, right? Your information alone won't get you to 1 million, or definitely not 1 billion, right? Because 1 billion people in the world know ideally they probably would benefit from being and adopting healthier habits, but they're not doing it. And it is not for sure a lack of information, right? Because they can Google stuff. And so when it comes to 1 million to 1 billion, now we're looking at systems and platforms. And so we're building gamified systems and AI that will help individuals identify where the weakest link is. And then sort of a gamified, we'll call it a fun, engaging video game-like process to get them to adopt the healthy behaviors. And so that it's going to take a whole platform, a whole process that gives people on the path or on the road of adopting healthy behaviors beyond just information. So we're just basically leveraging what video game designers know, which is how to get people engaged, probably better than any other industry, and applying that to health. So just platform instead of just information.
Okay. This is super intriguing. So I'm hearing that part of it is getting access to those people. And then once you are able to talk to those people, it's, how are you going to actually get them engaged? We live in the age of information. There is way too much at any given time, which is a different question that I'd love to chat about. But I'm hearing that the key is something that is really fun and engaging. So a video game-like process. Now, how did you come to that realization? Or is that something that you've already kind of proven and tested? Is that something that you're intending to apply? Can you just tell us a little bit more about how you came to that?
Sure. Yeah. So from the deepest level, what I've learned over the years, 20 plus years of meditation, is that whether you want to call it spirit, higher self, universe, or God, there's many labels. From the moment that we're born, literally, there's been hints dangled in front of us about our life purpose. And so, it's almost like the what would seem like random dots in our lives. At some point, if you meditate and look back at those dots, they paint an awesome picture. It's like masterpiece of art. And so as I look back in my life and sort of looking at the dots, literally there were times when I was young. One of the reasons why I would play video games for 20 hours straight is because they were very engaging. And so, and over the years, gamification became a thing. And if you look at Jane McGonigal's work, she was like the first person to get a PhD in gaming, basically a long time ago. But now there's all kinds of experts who are putting out scientific work and books on what is the process, what are the exact psychological variables that you want to control, or at least be able to clearly design in your platform to have a person be engaged. My favorite author right now on top of this is Yukai Chow, who wrote Octalysis. So he identified the exact 8 psychological variables that you would want to, again, sort of influence, control, design into your process. And you can apply this for onboarding new employees. You can apply this to getting your clients to do X, Y, and Z. You can apply to anything that you want, and it helps maximize engagement. And so just basically applying my experience of being on the receiving end of gaming to now being like a game designer and looking at, how do we implement the little psychological variables and using that. And so we've been using that in the clinic, like, in my brick and mortar business here, which I've had for like 18 years. It's like a test kitchen. We've been playing with these variables that we've learned through books and through science on our patients. And I'm pretty upfront with my patients and clients. They're all test subjects. I'm just the experimenter. And so that makes it fun. And so I get to, apply what works and what doesn't work. And then as we learn what works and doesn't work in-house, we then package that and build that into platforms.
Okay. This is a lot to absorb, but very, very intriguing. So I'm hearing that, this is something that you've been experimenting with for a long time in your brick and mortar business, but that, it's not something that you've come up with just on your own. You've been able to, first of all, observe in your own life how video games can be extremely engaging, which I think is really cool. I think that's something we can all learn from, is if you're looking for a way to engage other people, just look at, what has had those kinds of effects on you and kind of pulling from that. But then also using literature, using people who've studied into this and done the research to help you just make it as effective as possible. Now, I'd love to kind of touch a little bit more on this idea of making it fun. So one of the things that really captured me at U Summit, both during your talk, after your talk, was how you were able to just make the whole thing a lot funner, between the panda costume, cracking jokes, making us stand up and touch each other, cracking jokes about that. I can see a lot of this, making it fun and engaging, even in your one-to-many. I haven't had the opportunity to work with you one-on-one, so I can't speak to that context. What are some other things that you do in your communication style, beyond more in that one-to-one and one-to-many, not so much doing the whole video game platform, although you can talk to that too if you want, that makes something that can be really scary and inspire a lot of resistance for people fun and engaging?
Yeah. So in a one-to-one way, that could be, of course, customized. Like, to give an example, I just told a client last week who was having difficulty in adopting a behavior of stretching on a regular basis. And her husband, it's a woman, and her husband, she's like, oh, my husband does it all the time because he's so disciplined. And so the husband would try to get her to use discipline, right, to stretch, because that's his fuel and his motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like a creative, artsy person, right? And so I just said to her, well, find a creative, fun way to do it. And nothing more than that, right? And just enough cueing for her brain. Because, no one likes to be told what to do. But what you could do is you can give global suggestions and kind of plant that seed. And so I saw her today, and she's like, oh, yeah, I've been doing my stretches. And what she did was she told Alexa to remind her to do like stretches. So it was like a fun, creative way for her to solve, a problem for her, which was getting her stretches in on a regular basis. And so a lot of times just recognizing, if it's a one-on-one, like that individual, what's the little tiny seed that you can plant for that person that becomes the most valuable thing for that person to create in their brain. And some of that comes from the belief that, if we're like the coach or the consultant, or, if someone's hiring us, it's our job to see more potential in that person than they can see in themselves. And once we start with that frame of reality, we can start to realize that if they have more potential than they can see, then what we do is we just kind of flip a switch or plant a seed, and they can do the rest. We don't need to micromanage and tell them how to do everything. And so, I wouldn't tell her exactly the fun way to do it, because that would then, not make it fun for her. And so just, enough input, the minimum viable input that guides that fun as much as possible, right? So that would be a one-on-one scenario. And as you experience on one-to-many, so how I make it fun, there's no systematic process. Like the entire presentation that you observed on stage, I wung it. It was no practice. I was just on the fly, creating what came to mind, right? I did 0 seconds of rehearsing for that presentation. And I will say that some of that comes from doing so many talks, right? After a certain point, when you achieve a little bit of what's called unconscious mastery. You can kind of wing things and have it go well. In the beginning, structure is very important. And so I guess if your listeners are in the beginning stages of applying this, you do want to apply some type of structured, scheduled out. Maybe you list some things, maybe 10 things that you would want your target audience, or 10 things that they could do to make it fun. And over time, you can start to, we'll call it wing it, right? It just kind of comes naturally, right? So I'm a huge fan of structure before flow. And so through enough practice, you can get to flow. But in the beginning, you want some type of like listed out process. And I mean, I won't be able to tell you exactly what things to list out because that would be very customized and individualistic based on that specific intent and specific situation. But I can say definitely in the beginning, if this is completely brand new to you, for sure, Googling a list of like fun things to do X, Y, and Z and just coming up with some ideas that structure would be helpful.
Okay. So, even though I'm getting I'm getting the message that this is something that is a very dynamic and flexible process for you, I still think there were some really good kernels of truth in there. Some of the things I heard, are that different people have different motivators. This is something I've definitely come across with my husband as we kind of navigate who's doing what in the household and how to inspire each other with positive habits. But something that was a little bit newer to me that really resonated was planting a seed instead of just telling them what to do. I guess that's not new. I've known for a long time. I think many of us know, either consciously or unconsciously, that you pretty much can't tell someone what to do. It very rarely works, and often that creates more resistance than it solves. But what I really liked is when you said that it's our job to see more potential in that person than they see them in themselves, and inspiring that person. So, you didn't tell the woman that was looking for a creative and fun way or was challenged in starting to stretch regularly. You just observed and perhaps discussed with her what some of her personal values and motivators are, and inspired and encouraged her to find a way that worked for her within that. Thank you for sharing that. I think that is really relevant to a lot of us, again, whether we're trying to inspire other people in the health space or, if we are looking at more the agency or marketing space. Sometimes as experts, we want to be like, hey, just do this way, do it our way. But if you're asking a client to do something, it's really important that you approach it from a direction that they're going to understand. The other thing that I heard that really stuck with me is that in the beginning, structure is more important before you get to that place of unconscious mastery. So structure before flow. I know that repetition is one of those things that's really, really powerful, both in developing personal habits and in achieving mastery over something. And I know that I am a person who tends to put in a lot of structure, but there's people on the other side, who are more prone to winging it. And knowing that, you can get to that place of winging it if you take the time and energy to give yourself a little bit more structure, again, customized for your particular motivations at first. So thank you for that. One thing I'm curious to dig into a little bit more is dealing with information overload. I know sometimes that when I'm looking to educate myself on the best way to approach something about, especially in topics around health, all of these things that you mentioned, those main causes of inflammation that can really be barriers to living our best lives. I have read so much conflicting information out there. And again, even in the marketing world, there's lots of conflicting information about best practices. Even when you're looking at, again, going back to the case of health, even when you're looking at research articles and medical articles. So as somebody who specializes in that space, how do you deal with, first of all, just the information overload if you're putting something into Google, but also even within that more research-driven space, what are some things that our listeners can do to identify kind of what is kind of ringing true and what is perhaps not as important to follow?
Yeah, great question. And so this is such a great topic for your tribe because as digital marketers, right, I'm assuming everyone listening knows no matter how much Google tries to update their algorithms, there will always be ways to try to influence a system to get your page to rank high. And so, yeah, so it's very easy to bias and strongly influence the readers, not only in a way to get your page much higher, but then through very smart copywriting, right? Because there's all these researchers like Robert Cialdini who know how to pre-frame and influence people, and really without you knowing it. There's almost zero process, zero tool that I can think of that would prevent a consumer from being, we'll call it brainwashed, right? So we just have to accept that we're constantly being brainwashed. And so, because the least likely way to be brainwashed is to read medical journals, right? And so the reason I only read medical journals is because at least with the medical journals, there's no like SEO. They can't like game the system as easily. The only way they can game the system in published research is it's basically being funded by people with interest, right? So pharmaceutical companies can, for example, fund research studies that says supplements don't do anything because obviously it takes their profits. So that's probably the only way it could be sort of influenced. And so to circle back to your question, how can a consumer be safeguarded from this? Unfortunately, the answer is there is no way. I've looked at this in so many ways just because the system is designed for people to be able to innovate, no matter how much Google doesn't want to have people artificially have their websites rank high, but people consistently, they can write really good copywriting, long content and constantly put that out to get their websites ranked high. And it's of course all designed to influence the people to take actions towards their interest, right? And so, yeah, there's unfortunately I don't in this case, I'm a huge fan of like, how can we solve things? At this point, really the solution is to only read medical published research. Now, then it goes back to how many consumers can understand published medical research? Not many, right? So, I mean, I used to teach this stuff at a master's degree level, and it still takes constant reading to stay on top of it because they're constantly discovering new chemicals and new terminology and new things. I'd spend about a minimum of 4 to 6 hours a week reading research on a regular basis.
Wow.
And so really the answer is, my suggestion is for someone who really wants to improve their health, they're probably better off sticking with the very simplified things that I talked about, right? And that's why like the 5 things of just like, reducing stress, sleeping more, reducing toxins, helping your gut be healthier, and then, maybe some testing and eating foods that's not inflammatory for you. Really, those 5 things was a distillation of reading probably like 100,000 research articles in the last 20 plus years. Because I haven't been able to find, people ask me like, what's a good book to read? I'm like, well, all the books are biased, right? Because there's, I won't name any names, but there's tons of experts who will say sugar is addicting. Well, the reason is they sell the anti-addicting plant, right? Or people will say keto is awesome. That's because they sell the keto plant. And really, as an unbiased scientist, keto is not for everyone. Sugar isn't as damaging as they say it is. And so everything is just so biased. That's why I recommend just sticking to the 5 basic things that we now know is the root cause of pretty much all illnesses, and just apply efforts towards those 5 and stop looking at tips and tricks, right? It's not the true health does not lie in, X diet plan or X supplement or XYZ. It's just spend most of your attention on the 5 root causes of all illnesses and reducing those 5 as much as possible.
Okay. So again, just kind of reflecting back what I'm hearing here. So I'm hearing that, surprise, surprise, just like in marketing, there's no one size fits all solution.
Yep.
Likewise, there's no way to staunch the endless flow of information coming your way. So just as with any information, be discerning, be aware that people are speaking from a biased perspective. And whenever possible, look at or read actual medical journals and medical research. Or I'm hearing work with somebody who, again, just like in marketing, work with someone who has done that work, who takes the time to keep up to date on what's going on and can simplify some of that information for you. Now, one of the things that really stuck out, in fact, I think I asked a question about it during your talk was that, as you just referenced, different things are better or worse for different people. Now, I remember you had said that there were some physical signs that you could use to kind of gauge whether something's working or not working for you. You would also, something that you had brought was something that could physically check the average amount of nutrients that you have in your body. Can you speak a little bit more to some of the signs that our body or our minds might be telling us or giving us that can help us see whether or not our habits are serving us?
Yeah, great question. Yep. So, like anything, right? It's all about the data, right? Because at least when you just collect raw data, that raw data before any interpretation is essentially unbiased. And so, yeah, so the thing that I had at the event was just a simple laser scanner that can immediately identify essentially, are you eating enough fruits and vegetables, right? It puts that into a number. And so, like no surprise, when I scanned, I think I scanned about 90 people at that event, and 99% of the people were low in, their fruits and vegetable intake. There was maybe like 3 people at most, I remember, that sort of quote unquote passed the test with ate a lot of fruits and vegetables, and they were fine. And so there's some other things, right? So sleep disturbance is huge. Like if you're not sleeping through the night, that for sure means something is either psychologically bothering you or chemically bothering you, right? That psychological thing could be some type of pattern of thinking of the future and worrying. And chemically, it could be neurotoxins, right? And so many of the flame retardants, like, basically as soon as you touch your iPhone, there's a flame retardant called bromine that's going into your body, and it's very neurotoxic, right? And so we're unfortunately surrounded by lots of toxins. And so if you are building up these toxins, one of the earliest signs is going to be disrupted sleep. Some people think it's just because they're stressed, not realizing there's a whole chemical component to that. So that another one is inability to focus, right? It may not just be, ADD, that is a label of symptoms, but the inability of the brain to focus is another symptom of neurotoxins that's happening inside the body. So those are some physical symptoms. Now, if you want measurable things, and if you really want to dig into the science of health, right, you can get blood tests, for example, by a lab called SpectraCell. And that lab will basically tell you all the vitamins and minerals that's been in your body that's been either normal, in excess, or deficient. There's other tests. There's for sure tests that you can directly take to see how many toxins are in your body, right? So I just spoke about a lot of neurotoxins. There's basically urine tests that you can, collect your pee, send it off, and they will tell you, how many of these toxins are in your body. And just so you know, the research from last year shows that the lowest amount in an American, the absolute lowest was 300, and the highest was 700 of these toxic chemicals. So we know any of the listeners, if they were to do this test, it would be between 300 to 700 of these toxic chemicals in the blood.
Okay.
Another common test we recommend typically is to see what foods make you inflamed. That is by a company called Cell Science Systems. Basically, through blood work, they can figure out, is broccoli healthy for you or harming you, right? And so, unique to me, broccoli is very harmful for me because it makes me inflamed. And just by some of those hard data, right? So this is not some hacker, health expert, internet guru, health expert saying, hey, you need to do this and that. This is basically straight hard data that says, all right, these are the toxins in your body. These are the foods that are harming you versus helping you. And oh, by the way, these are the exact nutrients that you might be missing in your body, right? So those are just hard data that you can act on, right? So if you have nutrients missing, the report would tell you, go take these nutrients, and it even tells you the dosage. As far as the food, you would just avoid the foods that are making you inflamed. And then the toxins, that's a little bit trickier. So basically, the first thing I would do actionable on that is you can stop using some type of toxic products, mainly coming from shampoos, soaps, lotion, those type of things. Just look for
big. Just all the stuff that you use for personal hygiene every day.
Yeah, the most common things. And so, we do have a resource that we built from a master database. It's called Skin Deep is the master database. It tells you can plug in all your soaps and shampoos and lotions and tells you how toxic they are. The drawback is they just identify problems, right? And so we basically had a team of people create a separate database, and now it's just a database of what are the most non-toxic soaps, shampoos, and lotions. And that's just simply tossouttoxicity.com. You just go there, right? And so these are simple, actionable things you can do based on hard science. And now you're no longer chasing tips and tricks. These are literally like scientific data that you act on. And so that's probably the best way to go about this, where it's not biased information.
Okay. So once again, pretty relevant in terms of the things that we as agency owners might face from day to day. It's very easy to be sucked in by the latest tip or the latest trick or the newest thing. And what I'm hearing from you is that data can lie, but the hard data itself isn't going to lie, right? It's usually going to be your interpretation or the bias that causes that to not work. So what I'm hearing from you is that there are things that you can do that are relatively easy for people in, these super busy lifestyles, which is a whole other category in itself, that can give you the hard data on what works for you, whether that is the products that you're using and how they're affecting your level of toxicity, whether that's the things that you're consuming, whether they work specifically for you, and can kind of break you out of that cycle of seeking the kernel of truth, perhaps the needle of truth in the haystack of information. So I have just one more question, and then we can move on to just a super quick lightning round here, which is that all of this different things that can be affecting you. I know I struggle to sleep through the night only just recently in the past year, so I know that something has changed. And now I'm thinking, oh gosh, my phone has a neurotoxin. Maybe I should be looking at this test, that test, etc. So how do you suggest that people combat the fear and the stress? Because I know for myself, I tend towards stress and sometimes just overthinking all of the different things I might or might not be consuming, or having that conversation yet again with a friend or et cetera about why I'm eating or not eating something can definitely be just a stressor in itself. And you mentioned that in itself, that kind of guilt or that fear or stress can be quite toxic. So how do you suggest moving through this world that is full of neurotoxins without freaking out about it, essentially?
Yeah. So it goes back to, and it's sort of the title of one of my favorite books, like The One Thing. And you would just ask yourself, like, what's the one thing? And this also goes back to previous concept of we're much more capable and powerful than we realize. And so if you just ask yourself, like, your quiet space, it doesn't have to be quote unquote meditating, but quiet space, you're just going to ask yourself, like, what's the one thing that I can do right now to, minimize, the chemical exposures, right? And so just see what comes up. Because what's fascinating is when I coach people through that process on a one-on-one basis, many of them come up with the thing, right? Like that we don't have to like kind of tell them. They kind of know. And so, and you might be thinking, well, what if I don't know that these things are toxic? Well, the cool thing is many people do kind of know. There are things that they already have the knowledge about that they're doing that may be toxic. And you just start with those things, right? Because the process of learning the 8, 10, 50, 100 other things that are toxic that then you want to act on, that you want to act on, but you may not have the bandwidth to act on, is, like you said, a very stressful process, right? And so it goes back to reminds me of like Jay Abraham's book on like 21 things to get more out of what you've already gotten. And so that's literally just like taking your existing knowledge, existing resources, and just pick like one thing to act on and ask yourself what that is, and then just act upon it. Because we're all constantly brainwashed into chasing more information, right? Because people sell information. There's no one that puts out an ad that says, you've already got it, just act and practice, right? Because they wouldn't make any money on it. And so we're just constantly brainwashed and thinking, no, we need more. We need more information. We need more stuff. And so I'm a huge fan of just forever talking to someone one-on-one, like, you already have the stuff. Just kind of ask yourself, what's the one thing to act on, and commit to that. And, again, that circles back to an earlier concept of like getting that early win, because as you're doing that, you start to feel better, and you also feel better, not only physically, but you feel better psychologically because you're not overwhelmed. You go, oh, I'm just doing this one simple thing. And so many of these concepts, as you can see, kind of circle all together, to kind of answer your question, like, what's the thing to do? And in general, realize that stress being one of the 5 main root causes, I usually recommend that, make sure that as you're going forward and improving your health, improving your business, improving anything, that you do not approach it in a way that's going to add to stress.
Mm.
Right. And so just make sure that the relationship in which you're approaching all of this with the environment is one that actually brings you peace. And so that's an interesting question that people can even ask, like, how do I go about getting more healthy, improving my business, improving my relationships in a way that actually brings more peace? And then, and see what comes up.
Mm. Very, very wise words and great words, I think, to wind up on. I feel like I could not only continue this conversation indefinitely, but I just have more and more stuff to ask. But I think that that's just a really nice thing to leave our listeners with, which is that, first of all, you already have it. You have more focus, more power, more capacity than you think you do. And start with what you know, choose one thing, focus on it, make the change that you can. And if possible, do it well, you didn't say if possible, that's maybe my own bias that's coming out, but find a way to address it that isn't contributing to your stress load, because otherwise you're taking 2 steps forward and 1 or 1.5 steps back. So thank you for sharing that. Are you ready for 3 really quick lightning round questions?
Sure.
Okay. So what is the thing that you are most excited about that gets you up in the morning?
Fixing healthcare, definitely right now. And as big and daunting as that sounds, I have with my team, a pretty clear plan on executing that.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing it unfold. I'm definitely going to be following, as that is a priority that is very close to my heart. I think that also kind of answers our second question, which is, what are you most looking forward to in the next year? Is there anything specific you're looking forward to in your business in the next year?
Yeah. Definitely fixing healthcare won't happen in 1 year for sure. It's a longer plan.
If only.
So for the next year, so we're launching this new workstation that we've been working on for 2 years. It will launch definitely in 6 months, so within a year, that essentially will help people become more healthy while they're working on their computer versus right now sitting and working on computers so unhealthy. They recommend getting away from it every 30 to 45 minutes. So we'll solve that problem in the next 12 months.
Okay. I'm also very excited to hear about that. That was actually one of the things that I had wanted to potentially talk about, as well as some of our inner conversation. But like I said, could literally talk about this all day. So last question is, do you have a resource, either online or offline, that you think would really help listeners?
Yeah, I think of all the resources, it's not going to be my website and all that stuff. It's really going to be the database that we built for people, which is just tossouttoxicity.com, just because that is such a easy, early, simple win for people. Literally, like, instead of buying your regular soap, buy the soap, that's in this database, because you will cut out tons and hundreds of toxins in your body, which then, if you look into it, helps you think better, sleep better, which then, of course, has profound effects on your life.
Absolutely. And I will just say this. I like to keep these episodes focused on you, you, the guest. But for myself, when I started to make those changes, both external and internal, about the products and things that I was consuming, it was like I separate my life into before that period and after that period, because it felt like somebody turned the dial up on my empathy, on my intelligence, on my energy levels. I always thought that I was a lazy person. And just by making a few pretty simple changes in my life, I discovered I was actually an extremely excitable, energetic person. So I'll just say that. So to wrap us up, if people do want to find out more about you, and we will in the show notes link to all of these awesome resources and things that you've shared with us today, how can they find out more about you, and where can they check out anything that you might have for them?
Yeah, I do have a personal website, just drsteveyoung.com, dr and then steveyoung.com. So you can always connect with me there, or on Facebook, because we're all on social media. So I am on there.
Yep. And Steve really is the master of being able to convey information in kind of bite-sized chunks, whether that is a video or a post. So I know since I have started following your content, I've really, really enjoyed it. So definitely encourage people, check you out, check out Steve's website, check him out on Facebook, all of that stuff. This is a really, really important mission, and I'd really look forward to seeing you succeed at it. So in general, just thank you for being on the show. In the future, I'd love to check in again potentially and hear how things have changed and shifted and grown in terms of these awesome goals you have. In the meantime, thank you for sharing all that you know in such a valuable way with all of our guests.
Yeah, no, and thank you for having this amazing podcast and just kind of spreading this information along with so much more other, nuggets of gold that you give to others.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you said, which is that a lot of the information out there, all of the information out there, in fact, is biased to one degree or another. One of the reasons I really like podcasts is because I find it's a really organic way to share what you know and share it in a deeper way, in a way that's really accessible to all, even those people, who perhaps can't afford to work with you in your practice and things like that. So again, just as long as I could talk about this, I could probably repeat thank you a whole bunch of times. But this has been really, really excellent and valuable for me, and hopefully valuable for our listeners too. This is Say signing out from Say It Online. I will talk to all of you guys next time. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.